Well, as you know, today is Columbus Day, celebrating Italian explorer Christopher Columbus's journey to the New World in 1492. Well, you might be surprised to know that Columbus actually landed in the Bahamas and never touched this continent on any of his 4 voyages, or that the federal holiday was created by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1937. Well, to help us sort out the fact from fiction of Columbus via Skype is civil rights activist Eric Ward, and right here in our New York studio is Fred Gardaphe with the John D. Colandra Italian-American Institute. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
I want to start with you, Eric, if I can. I can remember, and I'm dating myself by saying this, but I remember learning in school, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, which was probably the only part of that was actually true. Parse out the fact from fiction. What were we taught about Christopher Columbus that's not true? Let's start there.
We were taught 2 things about Christopher Columbus. The first was that Christopher Columbus figured out that the world was flat. The second thing that we discovered or were taught was that Christopher Columbus discovered the New World. Both of these are myths. Everyone who had a basic education, including the Queen of Spain, Christopher Columbus himself, knew that indeed the world was round. The Greeks had discovered that 2,000 years previously. In terms of the New World, I think it's important to remember that for anywhere between 5,000 to 14,000 years earlier, that pre-Asiatic tribes had migrated across the Bering Straits. The other point is even Leif Erikson, perhaps as early as 500 years earlier, according to Scandinavian sagas, discovered the Americas. Finally, even some historians presuppose that Africans visited here in the New World as early as 3,000 years ago. The Columbus story is a myth that gets passed down from teacher to teacher and is repeated. And today we believe that it's real, when in fact it's an established myth.
Okay,
Columbus was looking for a trade route to Asia.
Right. And in fact, he thought he had made it for a while there before he realized his mistake. I want to bring Fred into this conversation. First of all, do you quibble with anything that Eric has said so far?
Not at all. No,
so then I want you to fill in the gaps. So those are the things that we were taught that he did that he didn't actually do.
Right.
He wasn't necessarily, an Eagle Scout of a guy, was he?
No, and he was a man of his times, and he should be judged by his times. I think the fact that Italian Americans celebrate their arrival to the United States, their contributions to the United States around this figure is very problematic, I think, because everybody bought the myth. But it's almost like once the myth becomes reality, once people realize it's just a myth, it's like the Italians are left holding it in their hands. They're the last ones left. This was supposed to be a holiday for all of the United States, especially at a time in 1937 when Roosevelt was concerned about the immigrants fitting in and especially gearing up towards World War II. Italian Americans served in the highest percentage of ethnic groups in World War II. So this is a few years before World War II that we actually get this official Columbus. People say that the first Columbus Day parade was held in Pueblo, Colorado by the Italian Americans there. And in 1892, on the 400th anniversary of Columbus, the Italians celebrated with a parade in New York. It wasn't Columbus Day necessarily, but it was the honoring of that. And it was the way that Italian Americans could become American.
Mm-hmm. And that makes sense. I want to bring you back into this, Eric. So how did Columbus Day, this day to celebrate, as Fred has said, the contributions of Italian Americans, how did this become a national holiday centered around Columbus himself?
Well, in the 1930s, the Knights of Columbus started Columbus Day, and they did it, I think, for a really important reason, which was to try to find a male role model that Italian youth could look up to. In dealing with that, with Black achievement in the Black community, I think that's completely understandable. The problem is that Columbus Day is outdated. What happens is that we end up dividing Americans because it celebrates actually a history of genocide, rape, and slavery. Columbus, once he figured out that there was potential gold to be had, his whole focus was the brutality of indigenous people in a sense to kind of corner the gold market in the new Americas. That included mass murder, that included torture, and that included enslaving indigenous people, forcing them to work, and taking them some back to Europe, where he gave them away as if they were property. What I believe is that Italian Americans have much better role models that they could look to today. I think things that make our country proud and move us together forward.
Well, and you just read my mind, Eric, because I wanted to ask you, Fred, because I'd asked you before we came on to do this segment, do you think we should be celebrating Columbus Day? You said yes, but maybe not around Christopher Columbus.
Right, and I've given talks all over the country about replacing Columbus with the idea of, precisely what Eric is talking about. We got stuck with Columbus. He was the only way that we could publicly come out and say we're Italian Americans. In fact, ever since then, I mean, we follow very clearly. You want to know why there are so many gangster movies? Ask how come there were so many black entertainers who had to put on blackface to enter American industry, entertainment industry. We have to first play the people that the other people have played that we are. And the people who continue to celebrate Columbus Day in a very reactionary way are swallowing the myth. And they are following this seems to be an endless pattern of, let's just take the myth and let's move with it, but let's add our grandparents and so on. And that's where it gets confusing, because it's really about, if you want to look at it, it's really about the working class.
Mm-hmm. Well, who would you put forward? If you could center this day around someone else beside Christopher Columbus, who would you say?
Well, I first of all, I wouldn't want it to be an Italian American. All right, even though we...
Interesting.
No, I wouldn't want it to be. I would want it to be somebody who represented all American. Maybe each year could be a different, maybe this could be the shifting. 1 year W.E.B. Du Bois, another year, Italian American and Americans in general have paid more attention to the wise guys of Italian American culture than the wise men. And this is exactly what needs to be done. So I would put forth, there could be any number of Italian Americans in business and politics and in the arts and humanities, sculptures, the people who built the Mount Rushmore, Capitol sculptors. There's endless numbers of people.
Michelangelo.
He's Italian, not Italian American.
Okay, I know, but I'm thinking of an Italian. Christopher Columbus was an Italian.
No, yeah, he was Italian,
Eric, let me ask you
they don't celebrate Christopher Columbus Day in Italy.
Very interesting.
At all.
Yeah, very interesting. And there are places around this country that don't celebrate Columbus Day. Isn't that right, Eric?
That's correct. We are seeing increasing protests against Columbus Day. I think, though, that Fred is right. It's important to understand the history of discrimination that has faced Italian Americans and how hard they've worked to overcome that, even though there are still stereotypes that persist. The problem with Columbus Day is that we elevate mass murder to the same level as, say, Abraham Lincoln or Martin Luther King. What happens is that it downplays, I think, the reality for indigenous people that still they're faced with today. For instance, Native Americans face 1 in 4.
I got to jump in right there, Eric. This has been a very enlightening conversation. Eric Ward joining us via Skype. Thank you so much. Fred Gardaphe, thank you so much. We appreciate both of you. That's going to do it for us. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow on Arise America.